There are civilizations that vanish without fire, without final battles, without a single date to mark their end. They do not fall in the way history expects. They fade. Entire peoples, once rooted in land, language, and memory, dissolve into silence so complete that even their names become uncertain echoes. No monuments burned, no empires conquered them in dramatic conquest, and yet they disappeared. But no one understood what was coming next. The collapse did not begin with chaos, it began quietly, in the unnoticed shifts of climate, in subtle migrations, in traditions that were practiced one last time without anyone realizing it would be the last. Long before their disappearance, these societies thrived in rhythms deeply connected to the land. Villages rose along rivers that never failed. Forests provided both shelter and meaning, and generations passed down knowledge not written, but lived. Daily life moved with a sense of permanence. Children learned the same songs their ancestors had sung centuries before. Tools, rituals, and beliefs formed an unbroken chain. There was no concept of end, only continuity, but beneath this stability, forces beyond immediate perception were already in motion, slowly altering the fragile balance that sustained everything. The first signs were not recognized as threats. A river that flooded less predictably, animals migrating earlier or not returning at all, crops that once flourished beginning to fail in subtle, inconsistent ways. These changes were dismissed as temporary, part of nature's cycles. Elders spoke of similar moments in the past, reinforcing the belief that stability would return. But this time was different. The collapse did not announce itself. It whispered through seasons that no longer followed their expected paths, through silences where life once thrived. As years passed, these small disruptions began to accumulate. Food scarcity became more frequent, forcing communities to adapt in ways they had never needed before. Hunting territories expanded, sometimes overlapping with neighboring groups. Tensions, once rare, became part of daily life. Traditions that depended on abundance started to lose their place. Rituals were shortened, postponed, or abandoned altogether. It still felt like a difficult period. Something to endure, not something irreversible. Decisions made during this period carried unintended consequences. Some groups chose to migrate, leaving behind lands that had defined their identity. Others stayed, doubling down on familiar practices despite changing conditions. Leadership structures began to fracture under pressure. Trust eroded slowly, not through betrayal, but through uncertainty. When survival becomes unpredictable, even the strongest social bonds begin to strain. By the time the signs became clear, it was already too late to reverse the trajectory. The land itself started to feel different. Forests thinned, rivers shifted course, or dried completely. What had once been reliable became hostile or empty. Communities that depended on precise environmental knowledge found that knowledge no longer applied. Skills passed down for generations suddenly failed. This was not just a physical transformation. It was a psychological one. A growing sense that the world no longer behaved as it should. But without a clear cause, there was no clear solution. As scarcity deepened, movement increased. Small groups broke away, searching for stability elsewhere. But migration brought new challenges. Unknown territories, unfamiliar climates, and encounters with other displaced peoples created constant tension. Conflict, once avoidable, became inevitable in some regions. Yet even in these moments, there was no single event that marked the collapse. It unfolded as a series of adaptations that slowly erased what once existed. Languages began to disappear, not through suppression but through disuse. As groups fragmented and merged with others, words lost their meaning or were replaced. Oral histories, dependent on continuity, broke apart. Stories once told with precision became incomplete. Names of ancestors faded from memory. Cultural identity, once deeply rooted, became fluid and uncertain. This was the quiet erasure, not of people, but of everything that made them distinct. In some cases, remnants of these peoples were absorbed into larger societies. They survived physically, but their original identity dissolved. Customs were altered to fit new structures. Beliefs were reshaped or abandoned. Over generations, the connection to their origins became distant, then irrelevant. It simply happened, gradually, until there was nothing left to remember. Archaeological traces would later suggest their existence. tools buried beneath layers of earth, patterns in the landscape that hinted at past habitation. But these fragments could not tell the full story. They could not capture the gradual unraveling, the uncertainty, the decisions made without understanding their long-term consequences. The collapse of these peoples left no clear narrative, only gaps where something once existed. What makes these collapses unique is their invisibility in traditional history. There are no definitive dates, no decisive battles, no singular causes. Instead, they represent a different kind of ending, one shaped by accumulation, by adaptation, by slow transformation. They challenge the idea that collapse must be dramatic to be real. Sometimes the most profound endings are the ones that happen without being recognized. And in this silence, a deeper pattern emerges. Human societies are not only vulnerable to sudden catastrophe, but to gradual disintegration. Stability can erode without notice. Identity can fade without conflict. The systems that sustain entire peoples can fail without ever appearing to break. But no one understood what was coming next, because nothing seemed to be ending, until everything already had. Today their absence is complete, not marked by ruins towering over landscapes, but by the absence of voices that once filled them. Forests that have reclaimed forgotten settlements, rivers that flow past places no one remembers. The forgotten collapse of entire peoples is not just a story of the past. It is a reminder that disappearance does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply happens quietly, until there is nothing left but silence.